Hey everyone, Settlers Lament here again, today I'm joined by Jeff from A Dormant Dynasty, the channel that used to be known as the Asian Capitalists, as well as Mr. Patriarch and 21st Reaction, all three of which have their own channels, which you should all subscribe to and check out. And today we're going to be discussing libertarianism and why we are all not libertarians anymore. All three of us have, complicated histories with libertarianism, but in particular, Jeff is our big guest today. So I thought this mainly would be structured around letting Kim discuss his history with this, and we'll sort of react off of that and go from there.
Right.
So how's it going, Jeff?
Going good. You guys just let me go on for 8 minutes on my thesis before you told me we weren't live yet.
Sorry.
So
practice makes perfect, man. I'm a teacher. This is what we do.
Yeah, it's quite a learning moment for me. How's everybody else doing?
Doing good, man. Just had a nice dinner with the in-laws, sung some karaoke, and got home just in time and made it through a car wreck on the highway. So almost didn't make it, but I did. So happy to be here. Thank you very much, Settler.
No problem. A reaction? Are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm here. I actually stayed in all day because I was flying around all yesterday. But yeah, I'm doing fine, and it's a privilege to be here.
Thanks. Yeah. So Jeff, did you want to get started on this, or?
Okay. One thing I do want to mention is that, as you said, Settler, in Discord, that this title is clickbait, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we're not actually here to dump on libertarianism and call it cringe and say,
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I just thought it was a really great title.
It's very Turley-esque.
I also when I chose today, I didn't realize it was Halloween when I chose this date.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess libertarianism is scary too.
It's the perfect day to express all the libertinism and all the hedonism. It's just right, actually.
So Jeff, did you want to get started, or should we?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know if I want to go on the same rant again. Okay, let's go on the same rant again. So earlier, before the stream started, we were actually talking about my Kali Yuga video, which is kind of, I consider, maybe my best video I've ever done. But ever since the Kali Yuga video, I've been trying to kind of analyze all of politics in terms of the dharmic framework. And so for those who haven't seen the Kali Yuga video or don't know what I'm talking about, basically in kind of Eastern tradition, specifically Indian tradition, the caste system is a kind of a very big thing. And there are these 4 castes of people. There are priests, there are warriors, there are merchants, and then there are kind of the lowest caste. A lot of different vocations would belong in this lower caste. There would be artisans, labor workers, and so on. But when we look at this kind of framework, we can clearly see that most libertarians would fit into this merchant caste, this merchant mindset. And what libertarianism is ultimately is an attempt at secular ethics, a secular system of ethics. So the way that I see libertarianism is that it is a mercantile attempt at secular ethics. And in all systems of ethics, there is a delineation between that which is good and that which is bad. So my critique of libertarianism mainly comes from the fact that I think libertarianism is an incomplete analysis of morality and ethics, because it comes from this third estate viewpoint. And what the third estate viewpoint really comes down to is what it defines as good tends to be prosperity, things like prosperity, creativity, human innovation, basically man's ability to use his mind and take control of his environment. And you see this very much quite often described by political camps like the objectivists. The objectivists say that man is a rational creature, therefore man should be allowed to use his mind and his reasoning to fulfill his potential. And along the same line, what libertarians define as bad then are things like poverty and poor material conditions. And also, of course, whatever forces are working to limit man's ability to prosper and use his creativity and his craft. So, and it's not that I think that this kind of framework is necessarily bad. I do think that things like prosperity, material wealth, and human innovation are good things, and that poverty is a bad thing. It's just that, as I said, this system is incomplete. Do any of you guys want to jump in, or shall I keep going?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made there, Jeff. The idea that progress is defined as being prosperity and wealth based. I myself, for those who don't know, I was kind of a talk radio style conservative before kind of becoming a libertarian and an ANCAP for a number of years. And one of the things, and then, now I'm kind of, I've disowned that and kind of a Christian reactionary of sorts.
Yep.
And one of the things that sort of began to steer me away from that being the measure of success was my own personal experience and sort of what I encountered around me. Because in 2017, I actually moved to South Africa, and I'm still here now. And it's amazing. You'll go to these small towns, dorpies, they call them, and there'll be sort of a farming hub for the town, and then sort of a bunch of small businesses. And you'll see a lot of people who live there, and they'll have an income which by Western standards would be, poverty level. But for them and whatnot, in their situation, to have a job, to have a place to stay, to have all their material needs met, and to have multi-generations living next to each other, and to have a little bit of money to have fun after payday, for them is a fine life, and they're happy with their state and society. And of course, from a Western mindset, it might be, don't you want to aspire to be more? But when you realize that these towns and these families have been here for hundreds of years, they don't particularly aspire to more. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, which is very, to my, kind of Western sensibilities, it's very different. But you begin to realize the more you experience, particularly outside of a Western context, that, this having prosperity, and not just prosperity, but increasing prosperity as the benchmark for success is simply not how people traditionally have valued social capital and what's important to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it like just clearly, if the goal of our governments is to increase happiness, and that is what they would at least often claim, it's clearly just not working. The massive levels of prosperity is not translating into massive levels of happiness. It doesn't matter how many Oreos you have. Increased Oreo selection does not does not produce increased happiness. We see this very clearly with very high suicide and depression rates that we have.
Mm. Yeah,
it's not like doubling our GDP again isn't going to change that.
Yeah, and actually, quite frankly, if we were really living in the best time possible, as the kind of libertarian view suggests, most of us wouldn't be here right now watching this stream or watching channels like ours. Right? There's clearly something that's there's a phenomenon on the right wing where a lot of us have become disaffected with the way that the world is.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me. What was his name? I think it was Fukuyama. Fukuyama
Yeah.
that was saying, wrote the book. In the 1990s, we're at the end of history. We've got it all figured out. We just need this utilitarian economic framework plus freedom and democracy, and we're set. But
Mhm.
like you say, we're seems that people are still pretty dissatisfied with that because it seems that the public luxury can't be the supreme law. And that's quoting Moldbug, obviously.
Yeah.
I also wanted to observe from your opening thesis that the libertarians seem to, and this is particularly Ayn Rand, it's pretty Randian, that they seem to continue the kind of Nietzschean way of being, where it's the will of the competent man, of the strong man, and in this particular case, the rational man, that he has right by his own fiat to progress and create more prosperity, and that's what it means to be a successful libertarian man. But as we know with Nietzsche, and then obviously with Rand after that, that doesn't really determine objective good versus evil. Nietzsche still has that problem of it's still subjective, but it's up to your own fiat. So
Mhm.
I just think that is part of the weakness in libertarianism. It is attempting to be a framework as opposed to a moral imperative. So it's always missing that thing in the same way that Nietzsche missed God.
Right. Yeah. And I'll tell you guys kind of one reason why I left. One kind of moment where it really kind of clicked for me, which was I think in the summer of 2019 when Belle Delphine was selling her bathwater. Uh, so some of you guys might know that I have a partner on my YouTube channel, Bill, who is a very staunch libertarian, and I think Bill and I actually had this discussion where it was we were talking more generally about e-girls, and Bill was saying that e-girls are great capitalists. They're taking advantage of the situation. They're using their skills, and they're making money. Bill was saying that he couldn't really come up with a good criticism of the e-girl industry. But for me, that really kind of, I don't know, it hit a nerve for me or something. But from that moment on, I began thinking about, yeah, they're making money. They're using technology. It's all it's the future. But at the same time, and I actually kind of thought back to, because I actually had been watching some reactionary content for the year before that. So I actually thought back to people like True Diltom and what they were saying about modernity. And then it really clicked to me that even though materially mankind is progressing, in another sense, a certain aspect of mankind was deteriorating.
Spiritual decline.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely always a big problem with the sort of libertarian mindset I once had. I don't want to get too much into my personal history of this. I've gone over it many times, but the basic point is I was originally a boomer con, and then I sort of slipped into libertarianism. But I don't think I was quite as radical as some. But I mean, I was pretty radical of a libertarian, just not like full ANCAP or anything like that. But I had an evangelical Christian upbringing, so that kind of helped me a bit. And it was something always kind of in the back of my mind that a lot of the stuff that I believed from a religious perspective just didn't really click that well with the libertarianism. This is something I went over in my Libertarian Christianity video, which I think was a pretty good video. The basic problem, especially since libertarianism is very often a American evangelical Christian phenomena, at least libertarianism in a broad sense, is that the way they sell it is that there doesn't have to be any conflicting between your personal morality or your personal religion, and and libertarianism, because libertarianism allows anything. You can be any religion in a libertarian, and you can play out your religion in the libertarian framework because it just allows you to have liberty and do whatever you want. But the problem with that mindset it is your ability to do things or enforce certain behaviors is actually determined by certain bodies in society, whether it's the government or whether it's Hollywood or whether it's the university system or whatever. There's always some sort of social regulating system that will come forth. This sort of baseline idea of libertarianism that we're all able to do whatever we want to begin with is just ultimately is a farce.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up Hollywood. That's precisely what is. There's an echo. That's precisely what has happened, because we've kind of gotten into not that libertarians are going to say we don't. Okay, obviously we don't live in a libertarian society. However, we do live in this kind of liberal world order where the government is not supposed to get involved with morality and ethics. But what has happened is that's how we've landed ourselves in the world today, where places like Hollywood and academia, corporations basically tell us what is good and bad and what social norms ought to be.
Yeah, in a sense, realizing what's wrong with libertarianism and how that falls apart is the same things that were wrong with the American tradition. Because I would say that the libertarians are kind of part of that basic American tradition. You can see that at the beginning, the mercantile elite were the ones that defined and took over and shaped America. So they kind of fit into that circle. But just in general, this idea of, okay, we're going to have these different sects, but we can't fight each other and kill each other. So we'll have to be able to satisfy, you have your beliefs, I have my beliefs, and we can just have a secular state. And that just doesn't work. See, that liberal framework doesn't work, because eventually a state church will come in and reassert itself. It's simply a power vacuum. So eventually that gets filled in, and by Eastern European migrants to California that are communists, and they infest Hollywood, or the development of the official press. Those kinds of things come and take over and form this state church that actually does regulate how people think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And you brought up something a minute ago, Settler, which I thought was really on the nose, where you said you couldn't reconcile, or you found it difficult to reconcile your Christian faith with libertarianism. And I think that's correct. I was, before this, on my right back, I was listening to I think it was a podcast with Aaron McIntyre and Endeavor. And what it was about, one of the things that they said, which I thought was really good, is they're taking an example of David French and how he was trying to preserve liberal values almost to the expense of his supposedly conservative values, his religious values, what he thought of as the good life. And I think that inevitably ends up becoming a problem for libertarians who try to walk the tightrope between advocating a more traditionalist way of life and their libertarian political philosophy. Because in my own case, what I ended up doing is my whole metaphysic was constructed around property rights. So it got to the point where, in order to rationalize it to myself, I can't speak for anybody else, but it was like, because I have property and I can determine what I want to do with property, and God created us and we're his property, and so he has property rights over us and thus property rights over the cosmos. It was a really kind of and it was sort of slow and sort of an insidious sort of spider web sort of way that this happened. I didn't plan this, but one day I just realized, wow, like I've literally built. I've shoehorned my religion, which at the time was, evangelical Christianity. I've shoehorned my religion into my political ideology. And, at one point, at some point, I think this might be unpopular to say, but at some point, one or the other has to give. And I do believe that fundamentally you cannot create an existing stable social order merely on materialist justifications. You need to have something more than that. You need to have a metaphysic. You need to have a religion. You need to have something that binds a people together, and something that at least in itself is internally coherent, like Christianity. Otherwise, you run into all kinds of problems.
Yeah, it like you said, one of the two has to give. When like there's this ridiculous phrase that you'll hear from especially mainstream center left people but just from lesser mainstream in general, and that goes back at least to JFK. The idea of like, oh, why should your religion have anything to do with your politics? And that's just insane. Religion isn't just like some cute thing about you. It isn't just something you do on on Sundays or Saturdays or something, because it's a family tradition. Religion, in the real sense, is how you view the entire universe. If how you view the entire universe doesn't determine how you view politics, then there's something really messed up with your worldview.
Right. Yeah. Because that first metaphysical question, why do we exist, and are we created by God in God's image? That the way you're going to answer that question actually informs everything else that you do, all of your approach to the rest of your existence. So, so I don't know how most libertarians would actually answer that question, actually, but if they deny God, then they kind of deny good and evil.
Yeah, what I've come across myself is, and for a while I sort of tried to walk this tightrope where I was a Christian ANCAP. So an example of this would be somebody like Tom Woods.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Right? So he's and I still like him. I'm not trying to dunk on the guy or anything, but
yeah, he's pretty based.
Yeah, and on social issues, he's pretty right wing. He's a conservative. He's got like 5,000 daughters, and it's great. But the thing is, I think what Tom Woods's problem was kind of the problem I have, where the anthropology is messed up. So maybe the religion's right, but the anthropology is messed up. The understanding of man is his problem, and sort of how people function as a group, and sort of what people are going to do in the real world. And ultimately, I mean, it's kind of like my throwaway line, but libertarians, I think, have the same problem that communists do, in the same way that communists were never able to create the new Soviet man in order to make their system work. Libertarians will never be able to en masse create the voluntarist man in order to have their order work. So it's kind of like, to use an analogy, it's like we have a Ford Fiesta, okay? And you want that Ford Fiesta to be a Ferrari so bad. you put a spoiler on the back of it, you get a turbocharger, you install NOS and whatnot, you get a body kit upgrade, and you're trying your darndest to make this Ford Fiesta look and run like a Ferrari, but ultimately it can't be done. It's going to be a Ford Fiesta, no matter what you do. And that's the same thing with humans. Humans are Ford Fiestas and will never be Ferraris. Mm-hmm. And what you can do with that Ford Fiesta is you can fail to maintain it. You cannot give it oil changes. You cannot, get it regularly serviced. You won't check the tires. And then what you can do is you could turn it into a big hunk of junk that barely runs. Same with society. Or what you can do is you could give that Ford Fiesta what it needs, not hot rod it too much. And then, you'll have, at the very least, a serviceable quality automobile. It'll never be a Ferrari. It won't be what you want it to be, but it will be good enough. And I think that's ultimately the best we can hope for with mankind.
Mm-hmm. Recently, I came across this term called an ethics of difference. And what an ethics of difference, the idea behind it is that, so for example, the new Soviet man or the new libertarian man, these ideas are ideas that where every man has to become, it's kind of the idea of equality almost, right? Of egalitarianism, where every man kind of becomes middle class, or every man becomes workers of the world unite, where under an ethics of difference, and I think this is this is basically the more reactionary view. It's that mankind ultimately is divided into people of different qualities, different spiritual qualities, different physical abilities, different differences, basically, and that we have to in order to create a ordered and coherent society, we need to actually acknowledge and integrate those differences into the system. And in a way, it's so there's this libertarian idea where we have to throw the communists out of helicopters, which I think is kind of misguided in this sense, where you don't have to get rid of people just because they're not the new libertarian man, or because they're the oppressive bourgeoisie. In fact, your system has to acknowledge that people of different tiers, different castes will always exist, and you have to build your system around that reality.
Wait, are you saying that we need to discriminate based on immutable differences?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. But it's also this word discriminate is also kind of it has a certain connotation in the liberal viewpoint, right? Where I would say maybe a better word is to distinguish. Maybe that has a better connotation. So it's like certain people are better at being merchants, certain people are better at being laborers, certain people are better at being managerial types. And it's good to make that distinction, and in order for people to kind of fulfill their potential. And this idea even goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle had a similar idea where an eye is only good as an eye, right? It's not good if you try to use an eyeball as something else. And that's how you kind of fulfill, that's how you self-actualize in a way.
No.
But people don't choose their own immutable characteristics, so you're just terrible and bigoted.
I am.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point you raise, Jeff. And that was again one of the things that you live in Africa long enough, it'll make a reactionary out of anybody, I swear, because it's one of those things that you come here and you with your liberal ideas and you think that the world works this way. And then you quickly realize that if you propose libertarian policies to your average South African, they think you're crazy. They're like, "What? No government. Like, are you nuts?" And not only that, but you also, particularly where I live in South Africa, there's a clear. It's such a weird place to live in, because I can, like, from where I live, I'm in a predominantly Afrikaans and English speaking white area with some kind of middle class coloreds which isn't a racial slur. It means mulattoes in South Africa, for if YouTube's listening. And but if I drive 10 minutes that way, then I'll be in a black township, which is it's basically a shanty town with a lot of people from the Eastern Cape. So they're not from the Western Cape, they're from the Eastern Cape. And so just within, again, not even like maybe a mile, we're dealing with 3 different language groups, at least, as many different racial groups, and everybody's got their own sort of way of doing things and their own hierarchy and their own yardstick by which they measure themselves. So, and this goes to what you were talking about, Jeff, where sort of this idea that everybody has to be, bourgeois middle class or they ain't making it. That's simply false. So, like, the yardstick by which somebody in Google Etu will sort of measure themselves is going to be different than somebody who lives, on the coast in a resort town, and for them, there's such a high level of economic sort of inequality and poverty and stuff, largely caused by government meddling and so forth, that for somebody in one of these townships or in a small rural town to have an income where they're able to provide for themselves and put a roof over their head and sort of have a little bit of fun money is, a tremendous success for them. They feel fulfilled in that, and they're happy with that. And, that's just, again, it's this idea that you have to universalize your experience and what you think success is onto the wider world is not only folly, but it's kind of arrogant. It's sort of like, yeah, I got it figured out. And if you're not doing it my way, you're doing it wrong. But, the guy in Googleetu, he might have other ideas.
And if you really think about it, the kind of arch rival of libertarians, the socialists, are kind of using that same framework where they have a different standard by which everybody should live by, but they're using that same, idea.
I just find it kind of humorous that, of course, it would be insane to propose this Ancapistan style thing in South Africa. Of course, they think you're crazy because, that kind of situation based on property rights. Our conception of property rights only exists in like a couple Western countries that were post-Enlightenment, and that's the only place that has the same libertarian conception of property rights in the entire world. It's just it's kind of humorous that they think that they'll put that framework anywhere and it'll work. So of course the reactionary solution to that is that different people will function better under different systems, and that's that.
Yeah, no, and I still, I still am sort of a fan of free markets and stuff, but again, this idea that it's got to be taxation is theft, and the government better be a night watchman state or you're doing it wrong is just incorrect. And it's not that like here it's like Africans don't have property rights. They do. It's just a different kind of property rights. Everybody's got property, but the sort of the way they conceive it, particularly familial structure, that's a big thing. That, and I'm sure, Jeff, sort of his experiences in East Asia, you see sort of a similar thing here in Africa with the importance of that family structure, not just the immediate family, but the extended family. Multi-generational households are a norm. You're expected to sort of take care of your parents when they get older. That's their retirement policy, basically. And this notion of sort of respect and deference to elders, and that, yes, you should sort of try and make something of yourself, but more important than that, you have duties and obligations on those around you, namely your family and your extended family. And that's a really important aspect of the human experience, which I think is sort of overlooked by libertarianism. So like the ideal libertarian man is somebody who, leaves his small town, goes to LA or New York and makes a ton of money. But, is that really the basis on which you can build either a stable society or have a generation of people who feel happy and fulfilled in themselves and what they're doing and leave a lasting legacy?
Yeah. And it's also the fact that, in the liberal world order, a lot of people who live in small towns increasingly are actually being left with less and less choice of whether or not they have to move to the city or not. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to live in small towns for various reasons. I mean, for the way that manufacturing bases are being shipped overseas, and the way that taxation on property taxes on large farmlands are increasing. increasingly more and more, we're just going to keep seeing more and more people move to the city.
I can tell you I still want low taxes. That's the one thing that
Yeah.
hasn't changed.
We all agree, yes. How about you,
0.01%.
Sandra? You a fan of low taxes?
I don't know. I think taxes should be based on how based or cringe you are. The cringer you are, the higher the taxes.
Of course.
So who would get taxed the most under that system?
Professors.
David French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good break to do some super chats. Steve Roberts for $20 says seems to require a majority of the population to be of the libertarian mindset. We are experiencing an increase in irresponsibility from our respective populations in the West. Yeah, I think that's a really good that's a really good point from two angles. First is just like actually maintaining a libertarian society, whether it's through like voting for libertarian governments or whether it's through like just supporting or just like supporting the libertarian order in a more general sense. If you're talking about like Ancapistan, where there won't be like electoral democracy or anything like that. In either of those systems, you need a large percentage of the population to be libertarian for things to work out. If people are unhappy with the libertarian system, then that system will go away eventually. And it just libertarianism has never really shown a way that they're able to get like most people on their side. And I don't think it seems realistic that they ever really will. I don't know. I mean, maybe it would be possible to have like your based libertarian city state, where people like self-select into it, and most people could be libertarian. But I do think that's a really big problem for libertarianism.
That's called Singapore.
Yeah.
But even Singapore is pretty authoritarian.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's authoritarian capitalism.
Yeah.
And for some reason that seems to work, and it's far more stable. I wonder why, but yeah, I mean, to the super chat, sorry, going a little too far there, but for the super chat, they get right to the fundamental paradox of libertarianism, is that it's supposed to be this free framework, but ironically, this framework in which everyone is supposed to be able to do their own thing must be enforced. So they like to pretend that it's not a framework that has to be enforced, but it itself, that the idea in some way is a framework that has to be enforced on the majority of the population, so they accept that ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll never get that, so it'll go round and round and cause lots of trouble.
Even the very fundamental of libertarianism, which is property rights, must be enforced, and it must be defended against some pretty big threats on the geopolitical stage.
Yeah. So another super chat, random username for $5. Love Bill and Jeff. I can't get enough of your videos. Constantly re-listening to them. The background music fits perfectly. Thanks. Jedi Knight Anything Cringe Walker for $2. Tax rate, line go up equal cringe, line go down equal based. And Luke,
I agree with that.
Luke, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that last name, for $7 Canadian. It isn't whether you tax, it's how and why you tax that matters. Property/inheritance tax seems evil, for example. I don't know. I mean, when I was a normie conservative or libertarian or whatever, I definitely would have agreed with that, because I never was quite full ANCAP, so I never quite said that, like, all taxation is evil and needs to be gotten rid of. But now that I'm not like a normie con or whatever, I have to. I mean, I still don't really like inheritance tax, but I have to say I don't really find property tax to seem that bad. Mm-hmm. The reason I used to have a problem with property tax was because it seemed to be either implicitly or explicitly saying that you don't really own your property, that you can pay off the mortgage completely, but you still have to give the government a big chunk of money every year. And at the time that that made sense to me, and I thought that sucks. Why is that the case? It's one thing to tax other things, but why can't you ever just totally own your house and never have to never have to keep on forking over money to the government for it? But the realization I came to is that there's a difference between property and sovereignty. And yes, you do own your house, and that ownership is permanent. But that doesn't mean that you have complete control over your house. This is why laws still apply on your house, and this is why taxes also can still apply on your house. So when I sort of really understood, I always kind of formally understood the difference between property and sovereignty, but when that really seeped into my brain after I stopped being a libertarian or normie con or whatever, it made me not really have as much of a problem with that anymore.
Well, if you think about it, you really only own your house right now as long as the United States government exists. If tomorrow China took over, your property right would be very much in question. So what if we rebranded property tax to kind of national defense payments or property defense payments? I think a libertarian could understand that. They want this to be voluntary. They want to have a market of different firms they could pay for property defense, perhaps. But the way the world works right now is that the nation defends your property.
Well, I'd say on the issue of taxation, reactionaries are just progressives, but better and more honest. So it's like we're accepting formally, yes, there is a state that has sovereignty over all the property that you own and use. And really, my argument against some of these taxes, giant marginal income taxes, etc., is less about they're entitled to have every cent of it, and more about what will make the society function better on the whole. So it's returning to that idea of the common good that the progressive pretends to care about, as opposed to this kind of individualistic desire for liberty that the libertarians and conservatarians have. And honestly, I actually technically agree with them slashing all the taxes we have. If we went back to the 1890s and had tariffs and taxes on consumption, big sales taxes, that would be way better, because that's reducing the hedonomic treadmill we're on. It would just be so much better.
Yeah. And Zero Kev for $5 says Park Chung-hee was too based, so the CIA killed him. I have no idea if that's true or not. I looked up who that was quickly. South African, or not South African, South Korean president, but I don't really know anything about South Korean history, so I don't know if that's true or not.
One thing I will say about South Korea is that it's kind of the at least in East Asia, it's the most global homo, the biggest global homo success story.
Oh, is it? I mean, I know abortion's still illegal there.
Yeah. Well, if you look at their pop culture is completely manufactured. It only came around in the 90s. It's a complete. I think it's pretty well documented that it was more or less created by the CIA.
Okay.
And you look at kind of the male makeup industry in South Korea and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's
it's the as I understand too, it's the biggest market in the world for cosmetic surgery as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't really know anything about it.
Yeah. It's the ultimate bugman hive.
Yeah. And whenever you hear about those gamer found dead after 4 days of it's always in either Korea or Japan, it seems like.
Yeah, I can report to you, I've had personal experience with them. The men they're not sending their best.
And one more super chat just came through. Jedi Knight Anything Cringe Walker for $5. If you didn't tax land and only tax consumption, people have more money to consume, and thus Mr. Government makes more money. I'm not really sure if that follows. If you didn't tax land and only taxed consumption, people have more money to consume, and thus Mr. Government makes more money.
I think he's making He's
So
making
the
like
money,
a Laffer curve.
yeah. So basically, the money that is eaten up in property tax he would spend, and then that would get taxed on a consumption tax. So they'd make up their money more or less anyways. Just it wouldn't be through property taxes, but through consumption, if I understand him.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, so so what else to do with libertarianism? I guess one thing that sort of was hit on earlier that I'd like to bring this back to is Christianity. Both me and Mr. Patriarch was talking about how that affected our libertarian mindsets back when we had those. And one of these things we've seen, as Mr. Patriarch was saying, is the phenomena of libertarian conservatives trying to reconcile their Christian beliefs with their libertarian beliefs, and usually it's seeming like that they allow their libertarianism to beat out over their Christianity. And again, this is as I documented in my Libertarian Christianity video, but this is just like so contrary to what like the Bible itself pretty clearly says. Romans 13, as I've quoted before, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear to the one who is an authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant, and for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjugation, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes. For authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay all what you owe to them: taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to who revenue is owed, respect to respect is owed, and honor to who honor is owed. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Protestant. I don't like to say, oh, this is just what the Bible clearly says. But like, wow, like Romans 13, it's pretty clear. I don't know how you can still be a libertarian after reading that. And I know a lot of these libertarian evangelicals. They're good Christians. They know. I'm sure they know Romans 13 quite well. I'm sure they've read this verse many times. It's a very famous verse. But taxation is theft, and compared to this, really does not seem very reconcilable.
Yeah, no, kind of the way I've ultimately kind of came to terms with that sort of thing is I've accepted, the reactionary. I guess sort of what defines the right fundamentally is two things. It's an acceptance of inequality as a fact of life and a positive good in many cases, and an acceptance also of hierarchy. I have accepted that somebody is going to rule over me, essentially is it. And, it's not ideal always, of course. But the thing is to the taxation point, I think it's just kind of one of these unavoidable things of reality at this point. It's sort of like complaining about, murder or well, not murder might be a bit extreme, but complaining about any other sort of thing that you sort of come across. It does serve some sort of, social good. You could say there's a large extent, I believe, that a lot of the services that the state provides could be carried out through private means, particularly in charity or medicine. I think the corporatist system we have now is kind of the worst of both worlds in the United States. But it's just kind of it's just sort of one of those things, man. Yeah. So that's just sort of my point on it. I've accepted that I'm going to be fleeced by the hierarchy, essentially.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the libertarian I think one of the reasons why people go towards libertarianism is it's kind of a throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They see how bad modern government is. They see how dysfunctional the current system is, and they say, okay, well, government is terrible. Why would I want government? Whereas they don't see the possibility that government can function in a more proper way, as in the Romans 13. Government is supposed to be one of the functions of government is to punish bad people for doing bad things.
Well, government is filled with a bunch of very evil, blood-sucking pedophiles. Therefore, it was always filled with evil bloodsuckers. I wanted to answer the Christianity question that Seller started with, and although, sorry about that. Although there are plenty of evangelicals and certain Protestant libertarians, and I would say that's probably the majority of them in the U.S. I'd say that the libertarian tradition in general is the only one that truly adheres to atheism, and as opposed to the progressives, where there's plenty of progressives that think they're atheists, but they really are committed to this dogmatic ideal of absolute equality, of as Dave described, human ontological and moral innocence, which is basically just everyone is born free, but I see them in chains. So they actually have those beliefs. When the libertarian is fully committed to the framework of liberty, which means everyone's choosing their own purpose, their own ideal, essentially. It's the one that's truly Nietzschean and also absurdist, because absurdism is about there's no inherent meaning, but you choose the inherent meaning for yourself, and that's how it becomes meaningful. So the libertarians are the ones that can actually remain consistent with that line of thinking, and that's how they're able to put aside the question of good and evil. That's how they're able to sidestep that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you bring up there. I guess to sort of tie off, I gotta get going here in a second. I was actually invited onto another stream, but pre-scheduled, of course. I'm not bailing, but I guess sort of one of the things you guys, I feel like this whole conversation really centers around my last takeaway is the understanding of what is man and how does he organize himself in life. Okay, so the problem, what you were saying, 21st reaction, is that humanity in the liberalist framework can sort of will himself into existence, or I'm sorry, will his ethics into being, right? So that Rousseau quote, "Man is born free, it is everywhere in chains." I believe it was Joseph de Maistre who said that phrase makes about as much as saying as sheep are born carnivorous, yet everywhere they nibble grass, right? So, which is, it's a pithy statement, but I think it's nevertheless getting to something fundamentally important. And it's that man is not a product of liberal abstractions, right? So there was no, if you go into the depths of time, there was no Lockean man who was in the wilderness by himself, who staked out a claim, mixed his labor with the land, and voila, you have Lockean property rights, which are clearly found in nature. And where those rights come from, if you move back a step further, not important, they just spontaneously originate. That's not true. That conception of what man is not true. What man is fundamentally is he's born into a family, and that family is part of a people group, and that people group has a culture and an identity and a way of doing things. And I'm not a moral relativist by any means, but those Christians, those morals and that cultural value is going to be expressed, whether it's good or bad, in that particular community. And that's sort of how man is. And man is hierarchical, and he's not going to function the way you would want him to as a libertarian. And to sort of throw one last grenade at the objectivists on my way out the door, there's also idea that you can sort of have this purely rationalistic, I'm so big brained, so I can just sort of, just become a captain of industry and whatnot. It's just really not how human works. But anyways, I got to get going, guys. So thank you very much for having me on. And
yeah, thanks for joining.
If anyone's interested in learning about fascism, I've made a multi-part series on that. So you guys can go check it out. Thank you very much for having me on, Settler, and I'll see you guys later.
All right.
Yeah, peace.
Adios.
And I just want to say on that point that, a lot of libertarians who might be listening to this might think of his description of man as bad things, but actually what he was saying, hierarchy and tradition and all of these things are actually good things. At least they can be good things.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that a lot of these libertarians, and especially lulberts, I'd say, that would react poorly to that, maybe the atheistic ones, the advent of modern libertarianism is, I would say, kind of a symptom, kind of a product of the dissolution of local identity and culture, and the dissolution of family. Those basic reactionary institutions that pre-exist you and mold you in a certain way, that you're not free to choose. And they try and assume that in the same way that progressives and the corporations want you to think, is that your identity can be chosen like a kind of a product to consume.
Yeah.
But really, that's not how it works. So it's just kind of a product of modernity, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think a lot of libertarians actually are against kind of this neoliberal idea about the kind of cosmopolitan man who just engages in degeneracy. And so, a lot of libertarians are, they claim that they want to be a force against globalism and against all of these kinds of things, against the current crop of elites, especially. So I would encourage them to kind of look more into the reactionary viewpoint if that's the case.
Yeah, I like what Mr. Patriarch was saying about how different cultures express themselves very differently. I don't think that is even like really I don't think that's any sort of obstacle for having a religious framework. I think a good religious framework allows different cultures to express themselves to the fullest extent. Not in any way, obviously, but that is what a religious framework allows people to really do. It is for that culture to be lived out in its truest and fullest way. So it's not like moral relativism to say that like different cultures express themselves very differently. It's if anything, this is sort of a thing that like seems to be a contradiction, but it's the left who they're the biggest moral relativists, or at least they claim to be, and yet they want everything to be this same globalist framework, and they're the ones that really seem to sort of leads to the opposite of what it seems like on both ends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a little pitch based on I didn't really get into my experience and how I could get off the ANCAP ship. I love how Seller, you were a conservatarian. You're always kind of moderate and prudent, but when I go somewhere, I go all the way. So it's full ANCAPistan, all that stuff. Property rights.
I mean, I wouldn't say I was like totally like a moderate libertarian. I was I was for a long time really interested in anarcho-capitalism. I just could never really totally commit to it.
Right. No. Well, I'm a full zealot and maniac, but really one of the first things is when I was much younger, like a kid or whatever, there's that Churchill quote. If a man is not a socialist when he's 20, he doesn't have heart. If a man's not a socialist, conservative when he's 40, he has no brain. And so I was definitely in the heart mode. So the Bernie bro face, just taking those pillars away. People are unequal. Hierarchies function more. Competence builds up society. And then there's those social issues. And I just remember very clearly on the issue of child sacrifice, it kind of it kind of destroyed my ability to be an ANCAP there, because if I just realized in this fundamental cathartic way just how evil and disgusting that is, well, I don't know. Maybe it's not a choice for me. Maybe it's just a desire. I have a thirst for justice. Evil has to be crushed everywhere it is. It has to be destroyed in whichever way, and to do that, you have to exercise power. So that's what was really the cognitive dissonance in my brain. Is like, how can I allow everyone to live in these local, communitarian ANCAP situations, but if someone over there is committing abortion, I felt like, well, I don't want that to exist anywhere. So I guess I'll have to have an integralist global empire. So
yeah, this is one of the this is one of the like really fundamental problems with any type of liberalism, left wing or right wing liberalism. It's just the existence of children. And this is something I've been meaning to make a video on, to go a bit more in depth, and a bit more thought out. But the basic point is that whether it's left wing or right wing liberalism, children just don't work with liberty. It doesn't mean anything to say to like a 4-year-old that, oh, you're free. A child needs to be taken care of by their parents. They need to be shaped by their parents. And children, abortion, all these things, saying just, oh, you have freedom, like none of this really works in in any type of liberalism. Like I think it's been a long time since I read Atlas Shrugged, but I'm pretty sure Ayn Rand just said explicitly that if a mom wants to let her child starve to death so she can buy a new handbag, that's her business. And it's like
autism moment.
I don't know, maybe I'm misremembering, but I could have sworn that was said in the John Galt speech.
Well, Rothbard has even worse. He's like pro-abortion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she was too. But yeah. So yeah, it just, because the way liberalism is always presented is you're always talking about like fully formed adults, and how fully formed adults work in society. But there's never really a liberal answer for like what does this mean for children, and everyone, you have to go through the child phase before you get to the adult phase, so it's kind of a really important phase. Mm-hmm. And there's just no real answer to this.
Yeah, and actually, as a parent, as a father of a 1-year-old, I'm actually not even as worried about her first number of years, developmental years. I'm actually worried about her teenage years, because as I think a lot of people have been through, the rebellious teenage phase. And at that point, there's not really parents can try, but there's really a lot of things that parents are unable to protect their teenagers from.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult question with well, before I go that, I just wanted to mention, I noticed the trend of, it seems that people shift away from freedom and more to order and law and justice and the good when they go from not having families to having families. So that's part of a nice strategy there. He became a father. The more he loved the child, the less he cared about freedom.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's what I always say. Anyone that's a dad is just like automatically 10 points more based than I am.
Exactly. And based on Jeff's issue about the troubling teenage years, I don't know if it's difficult to say whether this is like, is it the entire pond we're in polluted? Are we fish in a pond that was polluted and it used to be clean, and teenagers used to do, rebel a lot less. I know it's the classic story of young people think they know everything, so there's this kind of communication gap between the old and the young, and that comes through in the teenage years. But I honestly think that the boomer neglect culture, the kind of atomization, social media, degenerate media in general, kind of exaggerates that. And so when parents don't have a strong bond that they form with the kid when they're young, the kid kind of rebels against them for all their vices and all their problems that they had to deal with when they were younger. But now they're smart enough to, backlash.
Yeah, and I don't know if yeah, I'm really not entirely sure if things were different in the past or if they. But what I do know is that another thing is how kind of how we live nowadays. Kids spend way more time with their friends and their peers than they do with their parents. So things like peer pressure and all of their influences, and not only their peers, actually, also a lot of it comes from pop culture as well. So you could be as traditional a parent as you want, and sometimes that's not enough. Kids are gonna learn all the bad stuff from pop culture and their friends.
Yeah, I mean, all of pop culture, especially like kids pop culture, is specifically designed to trick you into thinking you live in an extremely conservative environment, but that they have like this secret trick for you to rebel against it.
Yeah.
And it's insane. It's something we see all throughout adulthood of left wingers, that they can live in the most left wing places possible. They can control everything. But they always think they're the ones out of power. And pop culture. I mean, I'm not saying that it's when I say it's specifically designed, I'm not saying this is necessarily like designed intentionally to do this, but this is how the design of this stuff works out. That everyone from a young age is encouraged to believe that that the left wing is like the cool, edgy, rebellious thing to do, and it's completely out of power. And there's these evil conservatives that are in power everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They always incorporate the rebellion, so it's. I think Oron McIntyre called it political cold fusion. It's just super powerful. So, of course, the solution seems to be that we need to all run in our bunkers and only come out to till the wheat fields. But Yasuke is giving a good question on this. That's part of the topic. The question is, how much, if at all, do you expose your kids to modernity? And I guess it's less of how you expose. It's how much you expose them, and in what way do you expose them to it, and how do you prepare them for that? Because it's the most alluring thing literally ever. So I mean, it doesn't seem like we're very free if there's always a trap right outside our door. There's always a Justin Bieber baby song to allure us away with siren sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I mean, I'm not a dad, obviously. I really feel like I was exposed too much to a lot of this stuff. When I was a kid. I certainly think it needs to be very limited, especially with the internet, because you're if you do not really control your kids' time on the internet, they're going to see very gross stuff at very young ages. So you don't want them to get an addiction to dirty videos when they're 10, which is like very common.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, just for like the most extreme stuff like that, it's really something that needs to be controlled. But even more broadly, I mean, I think the most important thing is you need to have a consistent moral framework to really strongly teach your kids from a very young age.
Yeah.
Preferably this is Catholicism, but I'm sure other things could work too. Whether it's another form of Christianity or another religion or whatever. But this really needs to be front and center in their entire life. I think So an exposure to other things should be limited, but it has to happen to some extent. You can't live in like some small town for the rest of your life, probably.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. The moral framework.
Yeah.
Because when I was growing up, when me and my friends would talk about girls, we would talk about which girl was most likely to put out. Don't waste your time with the cold freeze. She's not going to put out. But if you give them a different moral framework, degeneracy, sluttiness, and that kind of stuff, then kids can discuss this issue in a different manner, right? They don't have to adopt the American Pie frame where you're only cool if you get laid in high school.
So you're saying the only solution is absolute crushing authoritarian control of them and indoctrinating them?
That's one way to do it.
So it seems.
But yeah. No, I mean it's just very like I know you're joking, but no, it's just very basic. I mean, your children have to be taught something, and they can either be taught good things or they can be taught bad things. So teach them good things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking. We talk about this issue in Discord all the time, and some people say, well, that's been tried, and the kid reacts even worse to it. But I would say that that story of, oh, I was raised in a conservative household and now I became super liberal because they were just wrong about everything. I actually think it's an example of, kind of like the state, where the state does something bad. It's like they actually didn't have enough power. They actually weren't conservative or reactionary enough. Mm-hmm. Where it has to be, unfortunately, and some people aren't able to do this on their own, and it's quite sad. It has to be intellectually rigorous. It has to be fully complete and comprehensive, and just rock solid. They can't be able to poke holes in and deconstruct it every 5 seconds, or else they might actually react this way and just fall into hedonism. But it just has to be rock solid and inculcated from a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this whole I think this whole like, oh, I came from a conservative household and now I'm super liberal thing is mostly just cope. I mean, lots of things happen. I'm sure it happens sometimes. But the basic from both sides, from the left and the right, I think this is just cope. From left wingers who are like, oh, I came from a certain super conservative household and now I'm super liberal. It's just because, like I was saying, they like feeling edgy and like they're rebelling. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, in my experience, when you really prod at it, what they mean is like they went to church a couple times a year, and now I'm gay or whatever. And they were slightly upset with me when I came out. It's not really like, oh, it's not really like, oh, they were super religious. They went to mass 3 times a week. I prayed the rosary every day. And now I'm a radical SJW. I mean, does that happen sometimes? Yeah, I'm sure. Lots of things happen. But it's usually, from the left wing perspective, it's usually us, the left winger, trying to pretend they're this really epic rebel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from the right wing perspective, in my experience, it's usually a parent who did not do as much as they could to educate their children into the proper values, and then they're just coping and saying, oh, I did everything I possibly could have, because they want to accept that they kind of failed.
Yeah. Also, if you look at the absolute state of conservatism right now, it's not exactly the most rock solid moral framework.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's. Like I one thing I've been doing a lot recently, and I know people are going to say cringe, but I've been reading a lot of threads from the subreddit relationship advice, because I think it's very funny, and it's a very it's a very silly place, and I've been reading it a lot. And there's lots of different types of stories that you'll come across, and a lot of them are really similar stories. And one that I've been one that I've been seeing a lot, or one that I've seen several times there, is a parent who they tell their kids that like sex before marriage and just like and relatively casual sex and all this stuff is totally fine. But then they find out that their sex is like being really promiscuous at a still relatively young age, and they're pretty liberal parents, but what they're doing is still just too much for them. And it's always just like, you were laying out stupid values to begin with, and you're just surprised that your children just took it to the logical extent of what you were saying.
Yeah, it's just it's so annoying. It's like just a product of our Overton window just shifting over time. We just need to end history. We need to go back. Go back to the 13th century with this, honestly. But on a more serious note, I think the idea of them retaliating against the parent genuinely, if a kid is not neglected for the early part of their life, if they're given answers and not left out to dry, and given all those things that a kid needs, love, affection, blah blah blah, well, it would be very unusual for them to retaliate later on. So I just think that it's kind of a problem of our current situation.
Yeah, Fritz makes a really good point in the chat. He says, as someone who is raised Catholic. Now for non-Catholics, this may not mean anything to you. Fritz was not raised Catholic. He's not referring to himself. What he's referring to here is a very common phenomena on Twitter, or other places like that, where some like very normal left-winger will say, oh, I was raised Catholic, so they'll pretend to be an expert on it. And what they mean by raised Catholic is they went to like mass every year for Christmas and Easter. And maybe they went to a Catholic school because it was the best school in the neighborhood. Very few people go to Catholic school for religious reasons. They usually go to Catholic school because it's the cheapest, best way to go to a private school. There are some good Catholic schools, but most of them are basically just private schools. The Catholic aspect is usually very limited. But so these kids, maybe they went to a Catholic school, maybe they went to mass a couple of times a year, and now they're left-wingers, and they pretend they're an expert on Catholicism. And it's just cope. These people, like I said, these people aren't praying the rosary every day. They're not praying the rosary every week. They're not super religious, and they never were super religious. They just use this to try and pretend that they're an expert on the other side.
Yeah.
It's not like they have any biases or reasons to misrepresent the other side. It's not like they're addicted to anything, but that's how it is. I just wanted to make sure that it's still part of the cringe libertarianism idea. I want to give credit to at least some of the libertarians, people like Tom Woods and Stefan Molyneux. I think Tom Woods has like his homeschooling curriculum or whatever. But the fundamental problem with liberalism and libertarianism, they don't really factor in the nature of children. So either they just completely ignore that, or they go the other route like Stefan Molyneux and other people, where they focus especially large intellectual energy on that thing. And although they come down fundamentally incoherent on it, like he for example, Molyneux kind of, he may not say this now, but I remember frequently over his career saying this, that basically he uses the analogy of the child is like a prisoner that can't leave, so you might as well be as benevolent and giving as possible, because they just can't leave, and that's a situation that you have to deal with. So I don't think the relationship between parent and child is really analogous to prisoner. It should have this more sacred kind of idea, and that's why fathers are more reactionary and religious and based.
It also kind of goes back to that mercantile worldview where every relationship is transactional. So between a parent and a child, it's just merely it's a social contract that you take care of the child and then the child takes care of you. Everything becomes transactional. There's a denial of the more sacred.
It actually, and this is why it is possible that libertarianism is more authentic atheism, is that if you put it down to these kinds of transactional things, then you're basically denying the existence of love at a metaphysical level. There's no such thing as giving for someone as the other without any possible return into it. Rand tries to be kind of autistic where well, actually you get good feels and it comes back to you in some mental satisfaction, blah blah blah. But the more religious conservative position is to say that it is possible to love in that way that is not transactional, and it's fully giving yourself up. There's no way that libertarians could really explain, soldiers going out and dying for the country in a war. There's no possibility of duty or sacrifice in that kind of fundamental way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's why I say it really is true atheism.
So yeah, what what else? Do we have anything else to discuss?
Maybe another time. I'm kind of working on this. I mentioned earlier that this kind of framework for systems of ethics, right? I'm still working on the idea, I think, but I mentioned that libertarianism is this kind of mercantile viewpoint on ethics, whereas I see the reactionary viewpoint as less transactional and more about order versus disorder, where order is the ultimate good and disorder is the ultimate bad. And on the spiritual level, which was something that we brushed upon too, is where the ultimate conflict is really between good and evil, God and the devil. So I think that's how I would kind of place them hierarchically, from less material to more material. And there's one level below the mercantile, which is the ultimate conflict, is the conflict between equality and inequality, which we can see more so on the left and on the right.
In order to leave the libertarian and atheist position is when you see evil and it appears almost ubiquitous, it almost appears harmless, but you see evil and you begin to understand the nature of it and how it is completely corrupted and completely perverse in every way. And I don't know, that's just how it spoke to me. And you just get that feeling that it must be stopped, it must be resisted. Mm-hmm. So, to all those evangelical libertarians that may be more reasonable and based, well, what are you going to do about evil? Are you willing to sacrifice, your desire for justice and your desire to, end evil and promote your good as you see in your own religious worldview? Or are you going to go the very cringe David French route and sacrifice your desire for the good for the sake of some really boring liberal framework that's going to collapse in literally like 10 years? So the choice is clear.
Yeah.
We have a couple more super chats, okay, just two, I think. Zero Kev for $2. I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote. I'm voting. Yes, indeed. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I talk about abandoning politics, but I do think Americans, at least in swing states, should vote for Trump. So that's my endorsement. And a random username for another $5 says, "Square the circle of anointing rulers and the coming Great Reset," or of anointed rulers and the coming Great Reset. I mean, I kind of understand what he's talking about, but I also kind of don't understand what he's talking about.
Well, the libertarian viewpoint, it's once again, since the rulers of our current era are so bad, then how do you square the idea of having rulers at all, right? And so our viewpoint is that we can't have these satanic, technocratic, corporatist rulers be in charge of society, right? We need to have a proper framework for ruling, right? It can't just be, capital as power. We can't just allow Bilderberg and World Economic Forum and all of these types of people just because they happen to control the banking system and the global capitalist system, that they become the de facto rulers of our world. We need to change the framework, and in the process, change out the rulers.
Right. It's their question in a nutshell is the libertarian question. How can you submit to tyrants? How could you submit to, terrible parents? Is it truly, honoring, a parent to submit to them even if they deny their basic obligations and they deny their role as a parent itself, is it right to submit to a ruler that's whose fundamental purpose and obligation is to promote justice and bring down law, hopefully in line with natural law, if their entire MO is promoting unjust law, which is kind of paradoxical because the unjust law produces disorder, so it violates the very nature of government itself. And so that's the problem here. Really, the answer, like the biblical quote he had in the reactionary answer, is not simply submitting to the powers that be, but submitting to just government and just stewardship wherever it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is probably a good place to end off. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Make sure to subscribe to everyone that was here today, myself included. And make sure to donate to Settlers Lament, subscribestar.com/Settlers Lament, or I also have Patreon or Teespring. And yeah, thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.